This is Reah, and this is Just the Who of Us, where we talk about a range of topics including life events, current events, spirituality, entertainment, family relationships, as well as answering listener questions and more.
I wanted to have you back today to talk about your journey from childhood to being a behavior parent coach.
Yeah, I'm happy to
And
share that. Yeah. So childhood was, as I mentioned on our previous call, really, really traumatic in many ways. Um, when I was 2 years old, it was Thanksgiving, and my mom stood up and fell down onto the floor and found out she had polio. So, and she was 7 months pregnant with my sister. So she ended up in an iron lung, pregnant. If you can picture that, flat on your back with this plate coming down on your chest to compress and then release to inhale, and then compress to exhale, release to inhale for I don't know how long, a long time. And she was gone in the hospital for about a year. And she came home with this baby.
well, that itself is a lot for a small child.
And we had a series of women come in to our home and take care of us during that time. And then they stayed on after she was back home because she wasn't able to really move around and function the way, she wasn't like all better when she got back, basically. And as time went on, it was very clear my dad was completely unable to handle what was happening. Now he had 3 kids and he couldn't keep a job, and he was an alcoholic, and she became depressed being married to somebody like that. So she had not only polio to deal with, but also depression. So basically, from that time on, she was in bed a lot, and I was taking care of her. I was running for her food and bringing her coffee and her cigarettes, which she smoked in bed. And, just uh, one night I went in the bedroom and I couldn't tell if she was alive or not. And I was like 12 or 13 years old, and I called my dad, who was out of town, quote, on business, and it was just a nightmare. It was just a nightmare. And when she was the day I turned 14, I woke up and there were car doors slamming in front of the house, and I looked outside and there were police cars. And I walked out of the room, and my sister said, "Mom is dead. You can't go out there."
Wow.
Yeah. So when I say that I can see into the heart of a traumatized child, I'm not kidding. uh,
Yeah, really.
and I didn't realize my grandparents owned our home, so we got moved out of our house. They suspected that my dad killed my mom, and we went to an apartment with him, and one day he just left. And then I went and lived with a relative, and then went to another apartment with him, and he left again. And then I just asked my friend if I could go live with her. And her parents, she said, "I'll call you back." Her parents said, "Okay." And I graduated from high school while I was there, and went to college and stayed in the dorm when there were holidays because I didn't have a home to go to. So I got married really young and had 3 sons, and one of them had some pretty significant health trauma, made it through that, and uh, just just knew as I became a school psychologist. I went to graduate school. I became a school psychologist because I wanted to make school a safe haven for kids, which it was not for me. So there really was no safe haven, home nor school.
Yeah.
And I wanted to help them have a positive experience. And then I went to a training to become a life coach, and I walked out of there and I said, I'm a parent coach. And I made it up because that was 2000 and there weren't other parent coaches.
Right. Yeah.
So I just developed it. 25 years later, I'm still at it. And I've trained over 850 people worldwide to be parent coaches.
You know, it's amazing because that's what I between when I started, I said I was a family relationship coach.
Yeah.
And then I moved to parenting or added parenting rather. And it's something that, you know, this was already kind of a thing when you think about family and relationships. Coaching, relationship coaching is kind of a common thing. I don't know, I don't see a lot of parent coaches or the, you know, coaches who focus on the familial or parental relationships, but it is, you know, something that exists. And it's because people like you took the step to say, I feel like there's a need for this. It's not a common thing, and I'm going to start it, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. That's what happened. Just go for it.
Right.
And I was also on the board of Family Life Coaching Association for 6 years. So I helped to spread the word on parent coaching there as well. I've done a lot of speaking at conferences and collecting email addresses and writing a newsletter and all that. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's you know, there's work that goes into it outside of the work.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, you know, oftentimes when we experience trauma as a child, our reactions can kind of go one or two ways. You know, you can kind of engulf yourself in the thing that traumatized you, or you can completely veer away from it. And for me, I was sexually assaulted as a very small child, again, as a teenager. And well, as a toddler, as a child, and as a teenager. And by the time I became old enough, actually, I wasn't old enough, but by the time I became what I thought was old enough, I was sexually active. And I went through a period of promiscuity as kind of a very odd way of coping with sexual assault, right? When you've been assaulted multiple times, it's kind of like this. It's a weird way to say, I'm taking control of this. You
Yes.
know, I'm going to control how this goes because you're going to take this from me regardless, or at least that's what we think, you know, you're going to take this from me regardless. So I'm going to control how it's given. And in reality, we are, it can be, you know, the way we respond can be very harmful to our bodies and our psyches, you know. Um, and then you can kind of go the opposite way, which now I go the opposite way. Obviously, it took me a while to get there, right? But I understand relationships more. I know how to say no. I know that I can say no. I know what's safer for me, what's more healthy for me, and I teach that to my children, you know. But me at 14 through, you know, early 20s didn't feel that way because that version of me was healing, not even really healing. That version of me was coping with trauma. And so, you know, it's always um, kind of refreshing too to see the flip side of that, where you come out and you start helping other people avoid the things that you did out of coping mechanism or, you know, response to that trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having been sexually abused sort of changes the brain.
Yeah.
I think it creates an undeniable urge to replay that situation. That seems
Yeah.
like it was your experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's just like compelling to continue that behavior. And
Yeah. And it, to most people, it wouldn't make sense because even to me, I'm like,
no, it doesn't. It
it
doesn't.
doesn't like, why would you want to do that when that's the thing that hurt you? But it's kind of like, well, that's what my brain knows.
Exactly. Exactly. Brain changes occur, and it sort of becomes your self-definition in a way too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really sorry that happened to you, but I really love how you have risen from it. It's just so wonderful to see.
Yeah. Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, you got into coaching kind of the way, kind of similar to the way I got into coaching, because for me, wanting to, my initial plan for coaching was to start a coaching business and then turn it into a therapy practice. And I ended up just kind of keeping it coaching and using it for other things. But as a kind of response to things that I went through, like focusing on family after I went through some things with my familial relationships and decided, like, oh, I know a lot of other people go through this. I understand how to get through this now, and maybe I could help other people do the same thing, which
Yeah.
is kind of a common theme that I see in therapists, coaches, counselors.
Yeah. There's a common thread.
Yeah,
The wounded healer, right?
right, right, right. Yeah, yeah. And it's kind of an important component, right? Because you can kind of guide people on how to get through something, but if you haven't gotten through it yourself, it's just kind of giving advice, right?
Right. And it really ups the credibility when you've lived it, doesn't it?
Right, right. Yeah.
What I love about that too is that people can feel no judgment from me. And I certainly wasn't a perfect parent when my kids were growing up. Miraculously, they're all thriving now. But um, I went to adult children of alcoholics meetings. I read, I got therapy, I did all the things, conferences, as much as I could so that I wouldn't hand down that stuff to my kids. And they're all psychologists now.
That's amazing.
Crazy.
Yeah, but it's funny though how we break those patterns, right? Because my father was also an alcoholic and my mother for a period of time. And, I went through my own kind of struggle with alcohol. But I'll tell you who hasn't, and that's my children.
Right.
And even my oldest child, who I had at 14, and so he saw a lot of like, he knew my father more than any of my other children. He's known my mom for longer in life. He's seen certain struggles with her, and even him, he's very particular about how he drinks. We kind of give him crap a little bit, only a little bit, because we don't want to like push him,
Yeah.
right? But about drinking like girly drinks. But, you know, but I'm like, hey, keep drinking, stick to the girly drinks. Like, he does it's fine. But, he's always been very like, I've seen him maybe kind of drunk once, and that was because he had like a one big can of something. It wasn't even like he was throwing back shots of liquor, like it's interesting. It's interesting the patterns that we can break when we really kind of when we choose to and when we figure out how to.
Yeah.
One thing that I wrote about in my autobiography is generational blips, as I call them, but generational trauma, right? Because
Yeah.
the things that we see in front of us as we're growing and forming, our brains are oftentimes the things that we're going to imitate. And we can grow up and say that we hate them the most. Cigarettes. When I was a teenager, I hated the fact that my mom smoked. When I was pregnant, I asked her, please don't do that around me. I hated it so much. What did I do when I became an adult? I started smoking cigarettes. And, this was also like people, like you could still smoke in restaurants and all this crazy stuff. So it
Right,
was like
right.
everywhere, right? But me and my sister both hated it. But when we got on enough, we started doing it. She and I both went through struggles with alcohol. Pretty briefly. It only lasted a short period of time. It wasn't like our whole adult lives, but it still happened, and we had an alcoholic father. And although it's one of those things that we didn't like about him, it's something we ended up also struggling with ourselves. So it's like, if you don't change those patterns in yourself as a parent, then they just continue. Um,
Right.
you know,
It's just it speaks to the power of modeling. It goes
absolutely. Yeah.
deep in that child's heart and brain, right?
Yeah. And but it takes knowledge, right? Like when you're in it, when you're growing up in it, you can't blame yourself when you become an adult and you find yourself in it, right? Like it
Okay.
takes knowledge. But one thing that someone close to me, they've said it multiple times with, having adult children, young adult children around and seeing certain things in the world. At some point, we have to become responsible for ourselves.
Exactly.
And this is where gaining knowledge comes in, educating ourselves comes in, because we can only blame our upbringing to a certain extent, right? Like I can't be 40 and say, well, I still do this habit because this is what was shown to me. We go out in the world and we start learning other people. We meet people different from us. We meet people who don't have this in their life. They don't have the struggle with alcohol. They don't have the alcoholic parent. We experience different people in different situations. And at some point, oh,
Oh, yeah.
I don't have to do this. It doesn't have to be this way, and we kind of are then that accountability has to start forming to where we say, okay, I know different and I know better. And so now I've got to change that habit to do better.
Yeah. And I don't want to hand this to my kids, right?
Exactly.
That's the
Exactly.
motivation. I just do. I mean, I want to be a whole person myself, regardless of whether I have kids, but having kids was a huge motivator for me to just not hand it down to them. Stop the
Yeah,
generational trauma thing.
absolutely. Yes, very much so. Yeah, for me, I saw what it did to myself. I saw what it did to my little sister. And, I didn't want it to keep going to my own kids. And that took a while. It took it took me getting 2 DUIs to realize, like, oh, this is a problem here. And both times I wasn't like just out driving around drunk. Now I did. And never with my kids in the car. I drove around and drank what was it? Some kind of like canned alcohol all the time. The times that I got pulled over and received DUIs were not those times,
Oh,
ironically. Um, but when I got pulled over and I got my DUI, I was like, oh, this is a problem. Not on the times where I'm just riding around drinking. That was never, oh, like it never stuck out as a problem. I was going through a divorce. I was relocating, all these things. I had to start over career wise, you know, and so those were the things that I was focused on, and not so much my issue, my real problem. But it's crazy how that happens, because sometimes life has to kind of like smack you until you're like,
yes,
oh,
yes,
there's an issue here.
yes, exactly. And the whole idea of the smack, is it's a gift, because it wakes you up, and as adults we have the brain function to make a decision about that. You know, our prefrontal cortex, however developed it gets, is there for 23-year-olds women and 25-year-old men, but it can be delayed by trauma and ADHD and all the things, you know, but we get it eventually, and we choose. And but before that, I don't think it's a choice. I think it's just simply making it from day to day. It's doing the thing you know how to do to relieve the pain. You know, that's the way I see addiction, is just escape from a tremendous amount of pain. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so it's actually adaptive in many ways, because you have to escape that pain one way or the other, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's quite handy to have alcohol there, you know,
Yeah.
it's easily accessible, or other drugs, meth or
Right.
marijuana or whatever it is, you know, it's easily
Absolutely. Yeah.
accessible and it's a quick out. But
Right.
but
Right.
then we have a moment of reflection. Is this getting me what I want?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the more I learned about addiction, so before I really had any kind of insight into anything mental health, my question always regarding my father was, why did you choose addiction over us?
Yeah.
And the more educated I became, and the more experienced in life I became, my question changed to, what did he experience earlier
Exactly.
in life that
Exactly.
brought that addiction, that brought him to turning to that coping mechanism? Because and my stepmom used to try to explain this to me all the time, that your father loves you, but he's an addict. And of course, me, I'm like, so I don't care that he's an addict. Why is he choosing to do that over me? And but the reality of it is that there is some kind of trauma that happened that led him to turning to this addiction, right? And this addiction eventually took him over. It depleted his body, and he ended up passing away. And years after he stopped drinking, but he'd always kind of self-medicate in other ways. So there was
Yeah.
always something he was feeding,
Yes.
but the real question is, what happened to that person? That's what I want to know now. Like, what happened in his life, because something traumatic happened, you
Yeah.
know.
So that's the thing. Don't ask what's wrong with you. Ask what happened to you. Oprah Winfrey uh, has that, you know, what happened to you? She wrote a book with that title, and it's just so profound. So profound.
Yeah, one of and I completely forgot about this earlier, but one of the things, from for when my son responded to the ICU letter, he said, "I just feel so angry all the time."
Okay.
And I was like, "Thank you." I said, "That's amazing. Not that you're always angry, but the fact that you are able to communicate that to me, that's amazing." Like, I was so happy because now we have a starting point now. And I can understand that, because I've always felt that way. I'm anger is my quickest emotion. Anger is the easiest emotion. Frustration and anger have always been my easiest emotion. And not so much now that I'm older and I'm, more educated, but growing up, anger was my easiest emotion. Well,
Uh-huh.
it makes sense when someone was sexually assaulted multiple times, and when they have an addict parent, and all these different things. Their parents divorced when they were little. There's a lot of factors. Yeah, it makes sense that that person would always be angry. And for him, being essentially abandoned by both birth parents at a couple months old, yeah, that's something to be angry about. So, having the capacity to acknowledge something happened. What is that something that happened? And then we can really work on figuring out, okay, well, that makes sense as to why that's your go-to emotion.
Yes.
How can we work to navigate that emotion and navigate it when we're feeling it at these certain times, these showing it in these behaviors and things like that. How does it affect school, work,
Yeah.
etc.
And I really loved when I heard this phrase, anger is just sad's bodyguard.
Oh, I love that. I love that so much.
'Cause it is. It's a bodyguard
Yeah,
of
yeah,
sadness. And too often, most of the time, if kids are rejected by their adult, either through uh, abandonment or, I mean, alcoholism is abandonment when it comes right down to it, right?
yeah.
Because you don't get to be parented, you have to do something else. And
Mm,
kids blame themselves
absolutely.
because when they have parents, those parents are giants in their world, and it couldn't possibly be them that's the problem.
Right, right. Yeah.
So it has to be me. I mean, that is the automatic response of
Mhm.
most kids. It had to be
Absolutely. Yeah.
something wrong with me.
What did I do? What did I do wrong? How did I mess up? Yeah.
And so oftentimes the anger is with themselves, which is totally unfair, totally misplaced anger, but it's what they end up with, because of the dynamic of that parent being the giant. And it can't
Yeah.
be them, and it must be me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one conversation that me and my son have, or that I have with him, rather, I guess, on the topic of his birth mother, because I know that being a child, that's how he thinks. Well, she didn't want me because of blah 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 about me, right? Or whatever the specific case may be to him, but something about me she didn't want. And
Yeah.
so I've always been very intentional of telling him two things: that she God God gave gave her him to carry in her belly, and me to be his mommy.
Yeah.
And this kind of, it gives them a plan. Well, this was the plan for me. God
Yes.
had a plan for me, and this was this. It might have looked a little different than the rest of my siblings, but God knew that I was the right mommy for him. And so that's how I became, that's why I became his mommy. And also just letting him know that, like, you being a baby, completely innocent and helpless, are not the reason that she couldn't take care of you. The reason that she couldn't take care of you was, this reason.
Yeah,
She,
because of her own trauma.
because, yeah, she was struggling with certain things. She didn't have the financial stability there, just there were things in her life that she couldn't navigate
Yes.
and give you a successful life. And
Yeah.
so she knew that I could, and here I am. And
Yeah.
so, sometimes it looks different. And luckily the school he goes to, there's actually a lot of adopted kids at the school. So it's not like an uncommon thing for his social circle, for
Oh,
to be
lovely.
adopted.
That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
So wonderful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you've got a baby available a lot in your home too, because you can teach him by showing how innocent that baby is.
Yeah, that's true. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and
Um,
we wouldn't expect this baby to do anything so wrong that a parent would say, get away from me.
oh,
No
that's
way.
good.
Look at
Yeah.
this baby. He just eats and sleeps and needs rocking and loving and caring, you know,
Yeah.
and
That's
love
so true.
and love. And and if the parent doesn't have the love to give because that parent didn't have that love, that's nobody's fault actually.
Right. Yeah.
I just try to point to the innocence as much as I possibly can. Like when I talk about when kids act out, it's really their body, not their willfulness.
Yeah.
And I point out about the amygdala being the threat alarm in the brain. And kids don't have any idea they have an amygdala. and then it's
Right.
sounding off and saying, if your parents or caregivers see you, you will survive. If they don't, get their attention.
Yeah.
And and they know what gets parents and caregivers attention, negative
Right.
behavior all the time. It's like
Right.
there's this there's this ill-informed judgment out there on the part of adults that needs to go by the wayside now, because we know more now about where this behavior comes from. It
Yeah.
comes from the body of the child. And so I help parents calm the amygdala by reflective listening, by saying, you're really hurting right now. You wish this wasn't happening, or you wish something else was happening, so that, or you're feeling upset. I mean, just saying what it is actually calms the amygdala, because that is seeing the child, and the amygdala says, Mom saw you, you're going to survive. Calms the amygdala, and then the prefrontal cortex, that logic part of the brain, can come online, but only then. So too often we leap to logic with kids. You can't act like that because that's disrespectful. And that's not how we treat each other in our family. That's not how
Yeah.
you treat your classmates. That's logic.
Yeah, that's true.
First thing is reflection. Calm that amygdala so the prefrontal cortex can come online, because they don't operate at the same time.
Mm.
And the amygdala does not discriminate between positive and negative attention. So if you give a child who's acting out attention, you're actually rewarding the very behavior that you didn't want, because the amygdala says, she saw you, do that again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you can say to children everything they do right, which is, I say, be like Sherlock Holmes and watch for anything that you could possibly give them feedback on,
Yes.
like anything they're doing right. Usually what we do is breathe a sigh of relief and walk away, but to stay engaged, the way you would if something negative was going on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Stay engaged and say, whoa, when you did that, I felt so impressed, because it just shows me how grown up you're getting. What's going on here? Get out, just a little bit of fun and heartfelt appreciation.
Yeah.
Then the amygdala says, Mom saw you, do that again. And you're going to grow good behavior instead of trying to stop bad behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something that I found in my older kids. Um, that, so when I was pregnant with my son, I went to a high school, and part of it was for pregnant teenagers.
Uh-huh.
And so, we took parenting classes and things like that in preparation. And it's one of the things that I learned there, positive reinforcement, because it's true. It's if you point out everything they do bad, like that's all they know.
That's
Right?
how they define themselves, right?
That's
I'm a
all.
bad kid.
Yeah. And so I've always tried to make it a point in parenting to point out the good things they do too, because it's kind of like it takes one bad review to ruin like 50 good reviews thing. It like that's how our brain is too. You could say a whole bunch of good things about us, but if you point out one negative thing, that's all we can think about.
Exactly. Because the amygdala says, do that again. Do that again. She saw you. It doesn't matter if it's positive or negative attention. Do
Yeah.
that and kids, as I said, have no idea they have an amygdala. They think it's their fault, but it's not their
Yeah.
fault at all. So we go back to the innocence. The parents are innocent because they're doing the thing they learned how to do, and they just didn't know better
Right.
by coming down on kids when things are negative. So they're innocent, the kids are innocent, and so then we can work with how to move forward with it instead of placing blame, because placing blame gets you nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's called Present Moment Parenting. Oh, that's also the name of my book, Present Moment Parenting, the guide to a peaceful life with your intense child.
I love that so much. And some of this stuff, like My my youngest and my oldest are boys, and then my middle three are girls. And so, some things too that we always have to pay attention to is that every child is different, right? Because
Yeah,
parenting three girls, I got used to girls. I had my boy, and he's very much a boy, but having girls, it's kind of like, okay, you look for more like the attitude and stuff like that,
yeah,
the sassiness. And then you have this boy who's just kind of like wild. And, you know, on the surface, he's wild because he also has ADHD, he's has abandonment, and all these things. And so it's like, it can be, well, I'm not, because I've actually said this before at some earlier point in my parenting. I'm not used to I'm not used to parenting a child like him, right?
yeah,
Like, I'm used to girls, they have their hormones and blah blah blah, and we accept that, right? Okay, let's communicate that you can't talk to me that way. I understand that you're feeling this and this, but we have to communicate a little bit differently. But
yeah.
then you have a boy who's so completely different. And it's like, I don't I don't know how to parent like this, but we have to figure it out because, well, that's what we do as parents. But a lot of times when you have multiple kids, almost every time you have multiple children, you're gonna have to adapt to different parenting styles. And that's just how it is.
It really is. And when you mentioned ADHD, I used to work at a clinic for a brief time, and it was for kids with developmental issues and behavior issues. And they tested every single kid with ADHD for auditory processing deficits.
Hmm.
They all had it.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it does totally make sense.
Yeah,
So when you're trying to talk to a child with ADHD, you know, much of what you're saying isn't arriving in their brain.
yeah,
So that's why I encourage parents to use visuals, like writing the ICU letter.
yeah,
How deeply it went into your son when he saw it in writing.
yeah,
You saw him, and he reacted with such huge, beautiful interaction with you. I mean, it couldn't have been better. How could it have been
yeah.
even the
Right.
slightest bit better?
Yep.
You know? And so putting things in writing or drawing pictures and encouraging them to write back to you, like making it sort of like we're going to pass this notebook back and forth and it's just you and me. It's kind of this fun intimacy thing, it's like we got this thing going on between us and nobody else knows about or whatever.
Right.
And that builds that connections. It's like, so my little phrase for that is connect and reflect before you expect.
Mm.
Because if you're gonna run to logic right away, it's not going in
Yeah.
because of auditory processing and because the amygdala is firing, you know, and the prefrontal cortex is turned off, and that's the logic part of the brain. It's turned off. It's not going anywhere. So I love explaining this physiologically because it just shows that the kids are not doing this from their will, but from the need to survive.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's very important too, because a lot of times with children, especially when we are older,
Yeah.
and I say that because we have some people have kids young. I've had kids young, but now I'm 40 and he's 10. And so there's a big gap, and I know and understand things a certain way. And so sometimes when we have these gaps within our children and ourselves age wise, we
Yeah.
can forget that, oh, they don't know as much as I do. They don't understand, they don't comprehend the same way I do. But you kind of, and even sometimes, he can have conversations where it's like, oh, you're like talking to an adult right now. But
Uh-huh.
he is a child and he responds and processes like a child, and so sometimes it can be easy for us to forget that when we are
Totally.
dealing with small children.
Yeah, we're talking about brain development. Brains are body parts. You know, we don't expect a kid who has diabetes to get that pancreas working correctly,
Right.
get that blood sugar in line right now. We
Right.
never
Yeah.
say that to a child, but we don't remember
Right.
that brains are body parts. They develop over time and they are not little adults for that reason. We have to really
Yeah.
meet them where they are rather than expect something totally different from them. But one way that I really encourage parents to help that prefrontal cortex develop is to include them in the decision-making process instead of issuing a directive like, it's time to get this room cleaned up right now, to walk in and say, when you look around this room, what do you think needs to happen?
Right. Yeah.
Ask a question instead of give a directive, and that actually helps the child have to think about what needs to happen in this room, and that develops the prefrontal cortex because they're problem solving, which is another factor that is in that part of the brain.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, or the word how, like, I want to go outside right now and it's like dinner time and there's homework. Well, how does that work with the fact that we're about to sit down for
Right.
and we got to be sure that that math stuff is finished by tomorrow. So
Hmm.
help me think this through. Develop the prefrontal cortex, and it's also really respectful.
Very much so. Yeah. Because sometimes they can come up with ideas and it gets
It
them thinking
can.
too. They can be creative. I've had that with all of them really, but I was outside one day with one of them, with my youngest, and I said, do this way. And I turn around and he's doing it backwards. And I'm like, okay, so let's figure out how this makes sense or doesn't make sense. So
Yeah.
what's happening when you're doing it this way? Oh,
Yeah.
he was blowing leaves. Oh, I'm blowing it that way. I said, well, what happens when you get back up here to the front? Oh, I've got to turn around and blow it back down. And I was like,
Beautiful.
so now
Beautiful.
you understand why I said to do it this way. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because also too, with or without having ADHD, but I think especially with having ADHD, our kind of our thought process, sometimes we don't quite get there initially,
Yeah.
or if we have a thought out in our head a certain way, we think that's what's going to work, and someone tells us differently, and it's like, well, I can't see that because I have this planned out. So
Yeah.
sometimes we need to kind of talk through it to say it's something I do with my husband all the time. If I ask if, I want his input on something, and he's kind of like, well, just whatever you want to do. And I'm like, well, no, let's have a conversation because that helps me to kind of work it out loud. And then maybe my way is not the right way. Maybe your way is better, or maybe my way is right. But let's have this conversation so we can think it out and really plan better.
You're addressing the impulsivity part of ADHD, aren't you?
Right.
The brain just fires, and that seems like the thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
but you're slowing down to reduce the impulsivity. That's beautiful, Rhea.
Thank you.
It really is. That's just wonderful to say, well, let's talk it through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it creates partnership.
Absolutely, because then we're working together to figure this out and not just kind of one person taking it over. It's
Yeah.
it's an important part of relationships, working together and not just it eliminates that feeling of feeling like you're carrying the whole load. And it
Yes,
also reminds yourself and your partner, hey, there's two parts of the support system.
exactly. Exactly.
Um,
And then the kids see you partnering and
yeah,
you're modeling that, which is fabulous for everybody.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and two, it's important when you didn't have both parents in the home, you know.
Right?
Even for my younger kids, um, I feel like it's changed the trajectory of certain components of their future relationships because there was a portion of time where I was married before, and that marriage, a lot of it was strained. And then there was a large portion of time where I was a single mother. And so they've seen all that, specifically my older two kids, they've seen all that. Um, and now they see this relationship to where, like we talk, we kiss, we, like do all these things in front of them. And when we first got together, we would argue in front of them. And his mom lived with us at the time. And she made a point one day. She was like, "You guys should never argue in front of your children. Like, you should never like fight in front of your children." He was raised by a single mom. I was raised by a single mom. He actually had an abusive step parent at one point. I had a step parent kind of like I didn't live with them. So like, I only saw certain things. She wasn't abused. She's a wonderful person. Um, but we didn't have the in-home 24/7 solid relationship.
Right.
So for us, it took a little bit longer to get there. But now I'm confident that it it impacts the kind of relationships that they will have because they actually have that example set now, and not just the rough stuff. But
Yeah.
they've seen the rough stuff, but they also seen that you can grow and develop and have a healthy relationship. So, it's important to do those things in front of them.
Yeah, I just think it is good to let them see the rough stuff occasionally, not like on a daily basis or something like that, but
Right.
see that adults don't always agree, and here's how they come to an agreement,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't mean they don't get mad sometimes,
Right.
and that's very informative for kids about their future relationships.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But it takes work. It takes personal growth and personal work, especially when you don't have certain things exemplified for you as a child.
Exactly. Boy, have you ever really put your effort there. Wow. It's remarkable. It's remarkable.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You deserve it.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that a lot.
It's just true.
Well, unfortunately, we've got to wrap up here, but is there anything that you would like to address or comment or ask or anything before we wrap up?
I just like to know how to help people find me if they feel they would like to engage. It's howdoiparentthischild.com is my website.
I love it. It's perfect.
And Tina at howdoiparentthischild.com is my email. So it's a lot of typing, but it's worth it because it's kind of funny. And
Put
I'm
it
just,
straight to the point, and I love it.
yeah, and I have some openings, so just be happy to help whoever comes my way.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks again for being here, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
Thank you, Reah, for this beautiful opportunity. What an engaging, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Check us out on YouTube at Reah Higgs, ReahHagues. You can also keep up with us on Instagram at Just the Who Podcast.